The models are meant to be useful. They're not meant to be accurate. Now, I say this as somebody who built many financial models in my corporate days. It was my main job. And I was always acutely aware that my estimates and my predictions were not accurate. So instead, I designed them to be useful. And since most people will never be able to understand the distinction, you could explain it to them forever, and they'll look you right in the eyes right after you've explained it, and they'll say, yeah, but it's not accurate. And then you'll start again, and you'll say, okay, I don't think you're hearing me. Nobody can predict the future. So being accurate wasn't even in the set of possibilities unless you were just lucky. So being accurate is not even a goal. Well, the debate has already started ahead of time about whether the models were always bogus or they were good and useful and credible. And the argument's shaping up like this. Some people are saying, well, of course the death toll is lower than even the lowest estimates of the model. It's outside of the entire range of the model, but it's better. And it's because we did such a good job that even the models could not predict how effective we would be. So that's one of the movies. And the other movie, and of course we don't know how it all ends, but so both of these movies assume that they can predict that we're, turning the corner. Then the other movie says that the models were just baloney from the start, and we should have ignored them all and just kept going to work, and we would have never known the difference. Here's my take on this. I don't think people understand that models are not designed to be right. And I think that's probably, 95% of the public is under that impression, that if the experts build a model, that the whole point of the model, especially if it's got a very wide range, between 100,000 and 2 million people are dying, you figure that range is so wide, it's going to be in there somewhere, right? So that's the usefulness of the model. So if you're not anywhere in that gigantic wide range, critics get to say, hey, I told you. Now, and of course the critics will also point out that the bottom of the range assumed that you tried as hard as you could to mitigate. So if you do even better than that, well, what good was the model? It just shows that the model was completely in its own world from reality. I disagree, because that's not what the models are for. The models are meant to be useful. They're not meant to be accurate. Now, I say this as somebody who built many financial models in my corporate days. It was my main job. And I was always acutely aware that my estimates and my predictions were not accurate. So instead, I designed them to be useful. And since most people will never be able to understand the distinction, you could explain it to them forever, and they'll look you right in the eyes right after you've explained it, and they'll say, yeah, but it's not accurate. And then you'll start again, and you'll say, okay, I don't think you're hearing me. Nobody can predict the future. So being accurate wasn't even in the set of possibilities unless you were just lucky. So being accurate is not even a goal, because it can't be done. If anybody could predict the future the way these models pretend to, well, anybody who could do that would be rich from the stock market. They'd be rich from a dozen other things that they could predict and they could bet on. Because anybody who can accurately predict the future of anything, from a hurricane, from climate science, to the economy, the stock market, to the coronavirus, anybody who could accurately predict the future in those multivariable situations would just go make bets and be rich. But it's not a thing. It's just not a thing. So that's why people don't do it. If they could do it, they'd do it. They'd say, whoa, this model's giving me an edge. I'll go make a bet based on this model. Instead, the models are meant to be useful. Now, how many are you confused? Because you're thinking to yourself, and by the way, I'm using a persuasion technique now, I'll call it out in a minute, But how many of you are thinking to yourself, Scott, you're talking crazy, because you're saying that the models don't need to be even accurate, like even accurate within a gigantic range, they don't need to be accurate, and still they're useful? Explain that, cartoon boy. Those are like opposites. If it's completely inaccurate to not even be in the general range, it can't also be useful. Except that everyone who makes models know that they can be. Right? You'll see a few people say yes, the people who have some experience in this field. The models are not meant to be accurate. They're not designed that way. It's not a hope. It's not a dream. It would only be luck if they were accurate. What the models are supposed to do is change your behavior. That's the only thing you need to know. The point of a model is to change your behavior. And if the model does that, and it changes your behavior in a productive way, then it can be said that the model was useful, even completely inaccurate. So let's take this case of the coronavirus. What did the models which were completely inaccurate, did they persuade us? I think you'd say yes. At least enough of us were persuaded that it was a gigantic risk that huge changes in behavior happened fairly quickly. So did the models cause us to change behavior? Yes. Now the second question is, should they? Was it right to change our behavior? Well, that's the part that becomes the two movies and maybe will never settle. But the argument goes that if we hadn't changed our behavior this much, we would not be getting a result that at least preliminarily looks like it might not be so bad compared to the models. Now, can the models predict accurately how well people will respond even in the near term? Not really. Nobody can make a model like that because it can't pick up innovation. Did the models, for example, predict that somebody would find a way to split ventilators and effectively double the capacity, at least in those emergency situations and temporarily? Did the model pick that up? Did the model have a number in it for the effectiveness of the hydroxychloroquine? Because if the model did have an estimate for the effectiveness of the hydroxychloroquine, how do they know that? We don't know that. Why would the model numbers, how would the model people know the effectiveness of the hydroxychloroquine if we don't know and the scientists don't know? So keep in mind that these models are persuasion, and if they persuade you in the right direction, they worked. They were useful. Now, of course, they could over-persuade you, right? They could persuade you to do the wrong thing. So that's the distinction. If it persuades you to do the right thing, and even if you can determine that, because even after the fact, we'll never really know what was the right thing, even after the fact. We can only know, here's the only thing you can know, is if the model got people to act in the way that the consensus of the experts thought was the right way to act. That's about as good as you can do.